The hum of the spacecraft's engines was a melody I had grown accustomed to, a background tune that whispered promises of adventure and the weight of responsibility. I am Captain Rogers, and this is my story, a tale of survival, sacrifice, and the relentless march of time. Earth was dying. No longer the lush, vibrant cradle of humanity, it had become a barren, desolate sphere. Decades of exploitation and ignorance had drained the planet of its natural resources, leaving humanity gasping for survival. The oceans had turned into acidic wastelands, the skies into a perpetual haze of ash and carbon. Cities once teeming with life now crumbled under the weight of their own despair. But humanity, stubborn as ever, refused to yield to extinction. A final, desperate effort was made, Project Solara. Its purpose was simple yet audacious, to send a team of explorers beyond the solar system to a distant exoplanet, Solara 9, believed to hold the resources necessary to revive Earth. I was chosen to lead the mission, not because I was the smartest or the strongest, but because I had the grit, the discipline, and the will to endure the unknown. As a former soldier-turned-explorer, I had faced countless battles, but none prepared me for what lay ahead. Our crew consisted of 5 individuals, each handpicked for their expertise. There was Dr. Elena Voss, the brilliant xenobiologist with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue. Commander Jacob Haynes, my second-in-command and an engineer who could build miracles out of scraps. Navigator Mei Lin, a prodigy with a talent for charting the unchartable. Finally, Medic Aaron Cole, the heart of the crew, whose humor often lightened our darkest days. The launch was bittersweet. As the engines roared to life and the Earth dwindled in the rearview, I couldn't help but think of what we were leaving behind, a planet gasping for life, families clinging to hope, and a future that depended on our success. Solara 9 was 13 light-years away, but with the new warp technology, we reached its orbit in just under 2 months. The planet loomed ahead, a brilliant sphere of green and gold, pulsating with potential. From our scans, it was everything we had hoped for: vast forests, rivers teeming with alien life, and rich mineral deposits that could restore Earth's failing ecosystems. But nothing could have prepared us for what awaited us on Solara 9. The first hint of trouble came as we descended through the planet's atmosphere. The turbulence was unlike anything we had experienced before. Violent winds tore at the ship, and the readings on our instruments flickered with inconsistencies. It was as though the planet itself resisted our arrival. When we finally touched down, the landscape was breathtaking. Towering crystalline structures glinted under twin suns, casting rainbows across a horizon that seemed to stretch infinitely. Alien flora swayed in a rhythmic dance, as if to a song only they could hear. But amidst the beauty was an unsettling stillness, a silence that felt almost sentient. We disembarked cautiously, our boots crunching against the crystalline terrain. Every step was a mixture of awe and dread. Dr. Voss collected samples with her usual efficiency, muttering about the unique properties of the flora. Commander Haynes began setting up the mining equipment, while May and Aaron scouted the area for signs of life. I stood watch, my hand resting on the hilt of my plasma rifle, a gnawing sense of foreboding clawing at my gut. That's when we found the rift. It wasn't on our scans, nor did it appear natural. A jagged tear in the fabric of reality itself, pulsating with an eerie blue light. It seemed to hum, a low frequency that resonated in our bones. The moment we approached, our instruments went haywire, compasses spun erratically, communication devices crackled with static, and the air around us grew heavy. "What is that?" May whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, my gaze locked on the anomaly. "But it's not something we want to mess with." The moment Aaron disappeared, a stillness fell over us, a silence so heavy it felt like the planet itself was holding its breath. My training kicked in, years of experience in combat zones guiding my next steps. I raised my plasma rifle, signaling for the others to stay close. "Aaron," I called, my voice cutting through the eerie quiet. No answer, only the soft rustle of the crystalline flora swaying in a breeze we couldn't feel. Dr. Voss crouched nearby, her face pale as she examined Aaron's abandoned equipment. "Captain, this doesn't make sense. His comms were online just moments ago. There's no sign of..." "Keep scanning," I interrupted, my eyes scanning the horizon. "Haynes, May, form a perimeter. Nobody strays more than 10 meters from the ship." May hesitated, her usually confident demeanor shaken. "Captain, what if the rift?" "We don't know anything yet," I snapped, though the same thought gnawed at me. "Stay focused." The rift loomed in the distance, its pulsating blue light casting long shadows across the terrain. It had been unsettling from the start, a tear in reality that defied explanation. Now, it felt like it was watching us, a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Ours turned into a tense standoff with the unknown. The crew worked in uneasy silence, their movements mechanical. Voss cataloged the alien flora and minerals, her hands trembling as she recorded data. Haynes double-checked the mining equipment, his muttered curses betraying his frustration. I patrolled the perimeter, my rifle never leaving my hands. Every shadow, every flicker of light set my nerves on edge. Aaron's disappearance had shaken us all, but as the leader, I couldn't afford to show it. My team needed me steady, unyielding. When the first distortion hit, it was subtle, a faint shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising off a desert. Voss was the first to notice, her instruments beeping erratically as she tried to recalibrate them. "Captain, the atmospheric readings are fluctuating," she said, her voice tight with concern. "Temperature, pressure, even gravity, it's all unstable. Is it the rift?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Voss nodded grimly. "I think so. Whatever this thing is, it's affecting the entire area." That night, the whispers began. At first, I thought it was the wind, a low, mournful wail that drifted through the camp. But as the hours passed, the sounds grew clearer, more distinct. Words in a language I couldn't understand, their cadence both alien and eerily familiar. Haynes was the first to crack. "I can hear them," he muttered, his eyes darting nervously. "Voices. They're in my head." I pulled him aside, gripping his shoulders firmly. "Haynes, focus. It's just the stress. This planet is playing tricks on us." But deep down, I wasn't so sure. The whispers weren't just in the wind, they were in our minds, slipping past the barriers of reason and logic. Even I felt their pull, a strange tug at the edges of my thoughts. May tried to lighten the mood, cracking jokes as we ate our rations. But her laughter was forced, and her eyes betrayed her fear. Voss, ever the scientist, buried herself in her work, scribbling notes and running tests as if the answers could save us. As for me, I stood watch, my rifle ready. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not here. Not now. On the third day, we found a clue, if it could be called that. A few hundred meters from the rift, we discovered a patch of ground where the crystalline flora had withered and died, their once vibrant colors reduced to ash-gray husks. In the center of the patch lay Aaron's comm device, its surface scorched and cracked. "Radiation," Voss suggested, scanning the area with her handheld spectrometer. "Not like anything I've seen before," she said, frowning at the readings. The levels spike near the device, but they drop off sharply a few meters away. "It's localized." "Localized how?" May asked, her tone edged with frustration. "Localized like the rift?" Voss shrugged, a gesture that did little to ease our anxiety. "Possibly. But I'd need more data too." "You're not getting closer," I cut in, my tone leaving no room for argument. "Whatever happened to Aaron started here. Until we know more, we keep our distance." Voss nodded reluctantly, her scientific curiosity tempered by the weight of Aaron's absence. The next night, things took a darker turn. We had set up a secure perimeter around the ship, motion sensors and floodlights keeping the alien night at bay. I was making my rounds when the alarms went off, a shrill, piercing wail that shattered the fragile calm. I sprinted back to the camp, my rifle at the ready. Haynes and May were already there, their weapons drawn. Voss emerged from the ship, clutching a data pad. "What happened?" I demanded, scanning the area. "Motion detected near the rift," May said, her voice tight. "But there's nothing on the cameras." "Check the sensors," I ordered, trying to keep my voice steady. Voss tapped at her data pad, her brow furrowed. "The readings are strange. Whatever triggered the alarm isn't solid. It's like..." "Like what?" Haynes snapped, his frayed nerves showing. "Like it's there and not there," Voss said quietly, her gaze drifting toward the rift. We stood in tense silence, the floodlights casting long, distorted shadows. The rift pulsed faintly in the distance, its blue light seeping into the edges of our camp. I felt its pull again, stronger this time, like an invisible hand tugging at my mind. "Captain," May said hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. What if Aaron is still out there?" I didn't have an answer. The night after the alarms went off, I dreamed, or at least, I think I did. In the dream, I stood before the rift. Its light wasn't blue anymore but a violent, shifting spectrum of colors that seemed to burrow into my mind. Voices called out to me from within it, each one familiar and alien at the same time. One voice was Aaron's. "Captain, you left me." I woke with a start, drenched in sweat. The ship's interior was eerily quiet, the soft hum of its systems failing to calm the pounding in my chest. Outside, the rift pulsed faintly, its light casting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. I wasn't the only one struggling. Voss had retreated deeper into her work, barely speaking except to mutter about the data. May kept glancing at the rift with a mix of fear and fascination. And Haynes, well, Haynes was unraveling faster than any of us. "Captain," he said that morning, his voice hoarse. "We need to destroy it." I looked up from the tactical display I was reviewing. "Destroy what?" "The rift," he said, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "It's the source of all this. The whispers, the disappearances, it's evil, Rogers. I can feel it. I couldn't dismiss him outright. Hell, I felt it too, a gnawing presence at the edge of my thoughts. But destroying the rift? That wasn't an option. Haynes, focus, I said firmly. We don't know what it is. Our mission is to collect resources, not play God. But, that's an order, I snapped, cutting him off. He glared at me, his hands clenched into fists. For a moment, I thought he might lash out, but then he stormed off, muttering under his breath. The next day, we resumed our work near the rift. The planet's resources were too valuable to abandon, despite the growing risks. Voss and May ventured out to collect more samples, while Haynes stayed behind to monitor the ship's systems. I joined Voss and May, keeping a watchful eye on the perimeter. The air around the rift felt heavier now, almost oppressive. Even the planet's vibrant flora seemed to shy away from it, their crystalline leaves wilting as we approached. I've never seen anything like this, Voss murmured, crouching to examine a patch of soil near the rift. The energy readings are off the charts. It's not just radiation, it's something else entirely. Something else? I asked, scanning the horizon for threats. Something alive, she said, her voice barely audible. May froze mid-step, her face pale. Alive? Are you saying the rift is sentient? I don't know, Voss admitted, standing up and brushing dirt off her hands. But it's reacting to us. The closer we get, the stronger the anomalies become. Her words sent a chill down my spine. The thought of the rift being alive, or worse, aware, was almost too much to process. Let's finish up and get back to the ship, I said, my voice tight. I don't like being out here longer than we have to. We were halfway back to the ship when the distortion hit. It started as a low hum, barely perceptible at first. Then the ground beneath our feet began to shimmer, like heat waves rising off a desert. My instincts screamed at me to move, but before I could shout a warning, the world around us warped. One moment, I was standing on solid ground. The next, I was falling. The crystalline terrain fractured and twisted, forming impossible shapes that defied logic. Voss and May were ahead of me, their forms flickering like static on an old television. Run! I shouted, though I wasn't sure if they could hear me. I forced my legs to move, each step a battle against the shifting reality around me. The rift's light grew brighter, its hum louder, until it was all I could see and hear. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. I found myself on the ground, gasping for air. The terrain was back to normal, or as normal as it could be on this alien planet. Voss and May were nearby, shaken but unharmed. What the hell was that? May whispered, her voice trembling. An anomaly, Voss said, though her tone lacked confidence. A localized distortion of space-time. I helped May to her feet, my grip firm. Localized or not, it's getting worse. We need to finish this mission and get the hell out of here. Back at the ship, tensions were at an all-time high. Haynes was pacing the control room like a caged animal, muttering about the rift. May kept her distance, her hands trembling as she sipped a cup of water. Voss buried herself in her research, her fingers flying over the keyboard. We can't stay here, Haynes said suddenly, his voice sharp. The rift is killing us, Rogers. If we don't leave now, none of us are getting off this planet alive. We're not leaving without the resources, I replied, my tone firm. To hell with the resources, he shouted, slamming his fist on the console. They're not worth our lives. Enough, I barked, stepping between him and the others. We're a team, and we're going to finish this mission. Do you understand me? Haynes glared at me, his chest heaving. For a moment, I thought he might challenge me, but then he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. That night, I stood watch outside the ship, my rifle cradled in my arms. The rift pulsed faintly in the distance, its light casting eerie shadows across the terrain. I thought about Aaron, about the whispers, about the way the rift seemed to burrow into our minds. It was like nothing I'd ever faced before, a threat that couldn't be fought with weapons or strategy. For the first time in my life, I felt truly powerless. Captain. I turned to see Voss standing behind me, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the rift. Couldn't sleep? I asked. She shook her head. I've been analyzing the data. The rift, it's more than just an anomaly. It's a gateway. A gateway to what? I don't know, she admitted. But it's not just affecting this planet. The energy readings are consistent with something far-reaching, like ripples in a pond. Whatever's on the other side, it's bleeding into our reality. Her words sent a chill down my spine. And you think it's responsible for Aaron's disappearance? She hesitated, then nodded. I do. The day Aaron reappeared was the day everything fell apart. It started like any other, if you could call the grim routine we'd settled into normal. May and I were cataloging the last batch of mineral samples while Voss continued her obsessive analysis of the rift. Haynes, withdrawn and restless, sat in the cockpit, cycling through endless diagnostics and muttering under his breath about escape trajectories. Then the motion sensors blared. Captain. Haynes shouted through the comms. "We've got movement." It's him." I froze, the vial of minerals in my hand nearly slipping to the ground. "Who?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "It's Aaron," Haynes said, his voice wavering. "He's alive." We raced to the airlock. Haynes was already there, his rifle slung across his chest, his expression a mixture of relief and suspicion. On the external monitor, a figure approached through the crystalline terrain, moving with slow, deliberate steps. It was Aaron, or at least it looked like him. His suit was scorched, the fabric hanging in tatters, but his movements were steady, his posture upright. As he drew closer, the external cameras captured his face. It was unmistakably him. "Open the hatch," May said, her voice cracking. "Wait," I barked, holding up a hand. Something wasn't right. Aaron's eyes were glassy, his expression vacant. The way he moved, it was almost mechanical. "Run a scan," I ordered Voss, who had just arrived at the airlock with her handheld device. She hesitated, then activated the scanner. The readings made her gasp. "This isn't possible," she whispered. "What?" I demanded, stepping closer. "The suit," she said, her eyes wide. "It's emitting trace amounts of energy, the same energy as the rift." May took a step back, her hand hovering near her holster. "What does that mean?" "It means he's been exposed," Voss said. "He's changed." "Captain," Haynes interjected, his finger hovering over the airlock controls. "He's our crew. We can't just leave him out there." I glanced at the monitor. Aaron had stopped a few meters from the hatch, his head tilted slightly, as if listening. Then he spoke, his voice a distorted echo that sent chills down my spine. "Let me in." Against my better judgment, I ordered the airlock opened. We couldn't leave him out there, not without answers. As the hatch slid open, the rift's energy seemed to seep into the ship, a faint hum resonating through the walls. Aaron stepped inside, his movements stiff and unnatural. Up close, the changes in him were more apparent. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and faint blue veins pulsed beneath the surface. "Aaron," I said, keeping my voice steady. "What happened to you?" He turned to me, his eyes unfocused. "The rift, it showed me." "Showed you what?" "Everything," he whispered. "The universe. The truth." Voss stepped forward cautiously, her scanner aimed at him. "Aaron, we need to run some tests." "Whatever's happened to you." "You don't understand," he interrupted, his voice rising. "It's not just a portal. It's alive. And it's hungry." The room fell silent before we could process Aaron's words. The lights flickered. The ship shuddered violently, alarms blaring as the power fluctuated. "The rift's energy is spiking," Voss said, frantically typing on her data pad. "It's destabilizing everything." Haynes ran to the cockpit, shouting over his shoulder. "I'll stabilize the systems." "Captain, get him out of here." Aaron's eyes locked onto mine, a strange clarity replacing the vacant stare. "You need to leave," he said, his tone urgent. "It's coming for you." "For all of us?" "What's coming?" I demanded. But before he could answer, the distortion hit. It was like the fabric of reality itself unraveled. The walls of the ship twisted and warped, and the air grew heavy with an oppressive force. Shadows deepened, taking on forms that seemed to move independently. The rift's hum became a deafening roar. May screamed as a shadow lunged toward her, its form shifting and amorphous. I fired instinctively, the plasma bolt illuminating the room for a brief moment. The shadow recoiled, but not before brushing against May's arm. She collapsed, clutching her side, her face contorted in pain. "May!" Voss shouted, rushing to her side. I grabbed Aaron by the collar, shaking him. "What's happening?" "It's feeding," he said, his voice trembling. "The more you fight it, the stronger it gets." "Captain, we need to retreat," Voss yelled, dragging May toward the med bay. I nodded, shoving Aaron ahead of me. "Go! Get to the safe room." We ran, the ship's corridors twisting and shifting as the rift's energy seeped further into our reality. Shadows pursued us, their shapes unnatural and predatory. In the chaos, we lost Haynes. He had stayed behind to stabilize the ship's systems, buying us precious time. His last transmission crackled over the comms as we sealed ourselves in the safe room. "Captain, take care of them," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. "And finish the mission?" The line went dead. Inside the safe room, the remaining crew, Voss, May, Aaron, and I, sat in silence, the weight of Haynes' sacrifice pressing down on us. May was pale and sweating, the wound on her arm pulsing with a faint blue glow. "It's spreading," Voss said, examining the injury. "Whatever touched her is infecting her with the rift's energy." I turned to Aaron. "Can it be stopped?" He shook his head. "The rift doesn't just take, it transforms. It's already inside her." May's eyes fluttered open, her voice weak. "Captain, you have to leave me." "No," I said firmly. "We're not leaving anyone else behind." But deep down, I knew she was right. Over the next few hours, the rift's presence grew stronger. The ship creaked and groaned as its structure warped under the strain. Shadows clawed at the safe room's reinforced door, their whispers seeping through the cracks. Aaron sat in the corner, rocking back and forth. "It's not going to stop," he muttered. "It's never going to stop." "Captain," Voss said quietly, her gaze fixed on May. "If we don't do something soon, she'll become like it?" May managed a weak smile. "Better me than all of you." Her words hung in the air like a death knell. May's condition deteriorated rapidly. The blue glow spread across her body, her veins pulsating with the rift's energy. She looked at me with pleading eyes. "Promise me," she whispered. "Promise you'll finish the mission." I hesitated, my chest tightening. "I promise." With a trembling hand, I raised my rifle. May closed her eyes, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "For Earth," she said softly. "For Earth," I echoed, my voice breaking as I pulled the trigger. The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the rift in the distance. Voss wiped her eyes, her expression hardening. "We need to move. The ship won't hold much longer." I nodded, my resolve steeled by May's sacrifice. We had lost so much, but the mission wasn't over. Aaron stood, his movements hesitant. "If you're going to finish this, you'll need to go back to the rift." "What?" Voss said, her voice sharp. "It's the only way," Aaron said. "The rift is connected to everything. If you want to stop it, or even survive it, you have to face it." I met his gaze, the weight of his words sinking in. The rift had taken so much from us already, but if it was the only way to complete the mission, I had no choice. "We finish this," I said, my voice steady. "No matter what it takes." The rift loomed ahead, its light brighter and more erratic than ever before. Every pulse sent ripples through the air, distorting reality around it. Shadows twisted and shifted at its edges, their movements unnatural and menacing. The hum had grown into a deafening roar, a sound that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. We stood at the precipice, Voss, Aaron, and I, each of us bearing the weight of what was to come. The ship was no longer safe, its structure warped and failing under the rift's influence. There was nowhere left to run. "Are you sure about this?" Voss asked, her voice barely audible over the noise. "No," I admitted, gripping my plasma rifle tightly. "But we don't have a choice." Aaron, standing slightly apart from us, stared into the rift with a strange expression, part fear, part resignation. "It's waiting for us," he said softly. "It knows we're coming?" I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The mission had always been a gamble, a desperate attempt to save a dying planet. Now it had become something far greater, and far more dangerous. "Let's move," I said, leading the way toward the rift. As we approached, the air grew heavier, each step feeling like wading through thick mud. The terrain around the rift was alien even by Solara 9 standards. The crystalline structures were bent and twisted, their surfaces shimmering with an unnatural iridescence. The ground was fractured, glowing fissures snaking outward from the rift's epicenter. "Readings are off the charts," Voss said, her voice tinged with both awe and terror. "The energy levels here, they shouldn't exist." I glanced back at her. "Stay focused. We're not here to study it, we're here to end it." Her lips tightened, but she nodded, clutching her data pad like a lifeline. Aaron lagged behind, his gaze darting nervously. "It's alive," he muttered, more to himself than to us. "It sees us." "We'll deal with that when we get there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But deep down, I knew he was right. The rift wasn't just a phenomenon, it was a presence, an intelligence. And it was watching us. Crossing the threshold was like stepping into another dimension. One moment, we were standing on solid ground. The next, we were engulfed in a swirling vortex of light and shadow. The landscape shifted and twisted around us, impossible geometries forming and dissolving in the blink of an eye. "Captain!" Voss shouted, her voice distorted by the strange acoustics of the rift. "I can't, my instruments are." Her words were cut off as the ground beneath us gave way. We fell, not through air, but through something thicker, heavier. The light around us grew brighter, searing into my eyes, and then everything went dark. I woke to silence. The first thing I noticed was the stillness. The roaring hum of the rift was gone, replaced by an eerie quiet that pressed against my ears. The air was cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and refused to leave. I pushed myself up, my body protesting with every movement. The terrain was wrong. The ground was a black, glass-like substance that reflected a distorted version of the world around it. The sky, or what passed for it, was a swirling mass of colors, shifting and blending in a chaotic dance. "Voss? Aaron?" I called, my voice echoing unnaturally. "I'm here," Voss replied, her voice weak. She was a few meters away, clutching her data pad. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. This isn't possible. Where's Aaron?" I asked, scanning the area. "I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "He was right behind me, but then, Her voice trailed off as a shadow moved in the distance. It wasn't like the shadows we'd seen before. This one was more defined, more deliberate. It moved with purpose, gliding across the glassy ground toward us. "Stay close," I said, raising my rifle. The shadow stopped a few meters away, its form shifting and flickering. Then, slowly, it began to take shape. Arms, legs, a head. It was humanoid, but not human. Its body was made of the same iridescent substance as the rift, its surface shifting like liquid. "Who are you?" I demanded, my finger hovering over the trigger. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised a hand, and the air around us shimmered. Images appeared, scenes of Earth, of Solara 9, of the rift itself. It was showing us something, but I couldn't make sense of it. "What do you want?" Voss asked, her voice trembling. The figure tilted its head, as if considering her question. Then, without warning, it stepped forward. I fired instinctively, the plasma bolt striking it square in the chest. But instead of recoiling, it absorbed the energy, the light from the shot disappearing into its body. "Not good," I muttered, stepping back. The figure raised its hand again, and this time, the images changed. It showed us the crew, Aaron, May, Haynes, all of them standing at the edge of the rift. Then the images shifted, showing Earth in its current state, barren, lifeless, choking on its own destruction. And then, finally, it showed the rift itself, growing larger, consuming everything in its path. "It's a warning," Voss said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The rift isn't just a gateway, it's a weapon. It's trying to consume our reality." The figure dissolved into light, leaving us alone in the strange landscape. Voss turned to me, her expression grim. "Captain, we have to destroy it. There's no other way." "How?" I asked, gesturing to the world around us. "We don't even know what this place is." She held up her data pad, which was somehow still functioning. "The energy readings, they're concentrated at a single point. If we can overload it, we might be able to collapse the rift." "Might," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "It's the best chance we've got," she said. "If we don't, it'll keep growing. It'll consume Earth, and everything else." I nodded, gripping my rifle tightly. "Then let's finish this." Following Voss's readings, we made our way deeper into the rift. The terrain grew more unstable, the glassy ground cracking under our feet. The colors around us became more erratic, flashing and shifting in a way that made it hard to focus. When we reached the center, it was both beautiful and terrifying. A massive sphere of light floated above the ground, its surface rippling with energy. Tendrils of light extended from it, weaving through the air like living things. "This is it," Voss said, her voice trembling. "The heart of the rift? How do we destroy it?" I asked. She hesitated, then handed me a small device. "This is a charge I modified using the minerals we collected. If we can plant it at the base of the sphere, it should create a chain reaction." "Should?" I asked, giving her a pointed look. "It's all we've got," she said. As I approached the sphere, the tendrils of light began to move, reaching out toward me. I dodged and weaved, my heart pounding as I planted the charge at the base of the sphere. The moment it was in place, the tendrils froze, then lashed out violently. "Run!" I shouted, sprinting back toward Voss. We barely made it out of range when the charge detonated. The sphere imploded, collapsing in on itself with a deafening roar. The ground shook violently, and the colors around us began to fade. "It's working!" Voss shouted, her face lit with relief. But as the rift began to collapse, the shadows returned, more aggressive than ever. One of them lunged at Voss, knocking her to the ground. I fired repeatedly, but it was no use. "Go!" she shouted, her voice desperate. "Finish the mission." I hesitated, my heart wrenching at the sight of her struggling against the shadow. But I knew she was right. I turned and ran, the world around me crumbling as the rift collapsed. The rift collapsed behind me in a cascade of light and sound, pulling everything into its imploding heart. I stumbled, barely keeping my balance as the ground beneath me warped and twisted. The swirling colors of the rift were gone, replaced by a vast emptiness that stretched in every direction. It was quiet now, too quiet. Voss was gone. Aaron was gone. My crew, my team, my family, each one had been consumed by this mission, swallowed by the rift or sacrificed for the greater good. I was the last one standing, burdened with the weight of their sacrifices and the mission's success. The charge had worked. The rift was collapsing, its influence waning with each passing second. But I wasn't safe yet. The ship, or what was left of it, flickered into view ahead, barely holding together under the strain of the rift's implosion. I had one last task, to make it back. The path back to the ship was treacherous, the terrain shifting underfoot. Shattered pieces of the crystalline landscape floated in midair, their jagged edges glowing faintly. The oppressive pull of the rift had weakened, but it left behind a different kind of danger, a void that seemed to sap my strength with every step. My suit systems were failing. Oxygen levels were dropping, and the heads-up display flickered with error messages. I pushed forward, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. Every step felt like a monumental effort, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Ahead, the ship's airlock came into focus, its exterior scorched and warped. It was a miracle the vessel had survived at all. I stumbled inside, collapsing against the wall as the hatch sealed behind me. The ship's system sputtered to life, the faint hum of the engines a welcome sound. "Captain's log," I croaked, my voice hoarse. "The rift is neutralized. Mission successful. Earth's survival is assured." But the cost? My voice broke, and I clenched my fists, forcing myself to continue. The cost was everything. The ship's warp drive was damaged but operational. I initiated the sequence, watching as the control panel flickered with warnings and error codes. I didn't care. All that mattered was getting back to Earth, to deliver the resources we had fought so hard to collect. The warp jump was rough. The ship rattled violently, and for a moment, I thought it would tear itself apart. But then, everything went still. The black void of deep space stretched before me, speckled with distant stars. "Course set for Earth," I murmured, guiding the ship toward the familiar blue-and-green sphere that had driven us forward through every hardship. When I finally entered Earth's orbit, something felt off. The planet's surface looked different, the continents and oceans subtly altered. Communications channels were strangely quiet, and the familiar chatter of Earth's space traffic was absent. I initiated the landing sequence, touching down at the central spaceport. The ship groaned as it settled onto the platform, its battered hull a testament to the trials it had endured. The airlock opened with a hiss, and I stepped out onto the platform, my legs shaky but determined. The sight that greeted me stole the breath from my lungs. The Earth I had left behind was gone. In its place was a world both familiar and alien. Towering skyscrapers of shimmering metal reached into the clouds, their surfaces reflecting the sunlight in a dazzling array of colors. Vehicles hovered silently above the ground, their sleek designs unlike anything I had ever seen. And the people, they moved with an ease and confidence that seemed out of place in the desperate, resource-starved world I had known. "Captain Rogers?" a voice called, breaking me from my daze. I turned to see a figure approaching, an older man, his uniform crisp and unfamiliar. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were sharp and assessing. I replied cautiously. The man's expression softened. "Welcome back. You've been gone a long time." In the debriefing room, the reality of my situation came crashing down. The man, General Kale, as he introduced himself, explained everything. The collapse of the rift had caused a temporal distortion, propelling me 50 years into the future. While only months had passed for me, decades had gone by on Earth. "Your mission saved us," Kale said, his tone respectful. "The resources you brought back were the key to reversing the environmental collapse. Humanity has thrived because of your efforts." I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. "And my crew? Their sacrifices? They're honored as heroes," he replied. "Their names are etched into our history. But you're a living legend?" The words felt hollow. My crew was gone, their lives traded for humanity's survival. And now, I was a relic of a past that no longer existed. Walking through the streets of this new Earth, I felt like a ghost. The world had moved on without me, its people living lives I couldn't comprehend. The technology, the culture, the very air felt different. I was an outsider, trapped in a future I hadn't asked for. Children pointed at me as I passed, their parents whispering about the hero of Solara. Statues and murals bore my likeness, their inscriptions hailing me as the savior of Earth. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt empty. That night, I stood on a balcony overlooking the shimmering city. The stars above were the same, their light unchanged despite the passage of time. I activated my recorder, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my heart. "This is Captain Rogers," I began. "Mission complete. Earth is saved. But the cost," I paused, taking a deep breath. "The cost is something I'll carry for the rest of my life. To my crew, Aaron, May, Haynes, Voss, your sacrifices will never be forgotten. You gave everything, and I will make sure the world remembers." I looked up at the stars, the weight of my words pressing down on me. If you're hearing this, remember, the stars are not just places of wonder. They are places of sacrifice. Approach them with courage, but never forget the cost. I ended the recording and stared into the night, the city below bustling with life. I had saved humanity, but I had lost everything in the process. And so, I stood there, a man out of time, gazing at the stars that had both given me purpose and taken everything I loved. Years later, stories would be told of Captain Rogers, the man who braved the rift and saved Earth. His name became synonymous with courage and sacrifice, a symbol of humanity's resilience. But for Rogers himself, the mission was never about glory or recognition. It was about his crew, his team, his family. As the stars continued to shine, so too did the legacy of Captain Rogers, a hero who gave everything for the survival of a world that would never be the same. Years passed, but the weight of the mission never left me. The future I had returned to was bright, thriving, yet I always felt like a shadow in its light. The faces of my crew haunted my dreams: Aaron's curiosity, May's bravery, Haynes's resilience, and Voss's intellect. Each of them had given everything for this moment, yet they would never see the world they helped save. Humanity moved forward, reaching for the stars with new confidence, but I remained anchored in the past. I couldn't join them in their celebrations, their triumphs. I had become a relic of a bygone era, a symbol, not a man. But perhaps that was my role. To stand as a reminder that progress demands sacrifice, that every step forward comes at a cost. I told my story to anyone who would listen, not for glory, but so that the names of my crew would live on. They deserved that much. One day, I found myself standing at the edge of a launch pad, watching as a new generation of explorers prepared to embark on their own journey to the stars. I felt a pang of longing, but also hope. They would carry humanity's torch forward, just as we had. As the engines roared to life and the ship ascended into the heavens, I whispered a silent prayer: "May their stars be kind." Turning away, I felt a strange sense of peace. My journey was over, but theirs was just beginning. And maybe, in some small way, I would always be with them, a voice from the past, guiding them through the unknown. For the first time in years, I looked up at the stars and smiled. They no longer felt like a burden. They felt like home.